The stars burned cold against the black canvas of space, their light reaching across impossible distances to touch the hull of the eternal flame. Inside the massive colony ship, Captain Dravan stood in the observation chamber, his bronze scales reflecting the starlight in dull patterns. Once those scales had gleamed like polished metal. Now they carried the same gray tint that marked every dragon aboard. Death had become a familiar visitor on the eternal flame. Dravan could feel it moving through the corridors, claiming another soul every few rotations. The colony that had left their dying homeworld with such hope now drifted through the void, carrying their doom with them. "Grandfather!" The voice came soft from behind him. Dravan turned to see Kira approaching, her silver scales dim with fatigue. She was young, barely into her second century, and she had spent most of her life aboard this ship. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, now held only exhaustion. "How many today?" Dravan asked, though his heart already knew the answer would bring pain. "5 more stopped breathing during the rest cycle," Kira replied, her voice steady despite the grief. "Elder Thane, the twins Pila and Nox, young Brim, and—" Her voice caught. "An instructor Vess." Dravan closed his eyes. Vess had taught 3 generations of young dragons, including Kira herself. The old teacher had survived wars, cosmic storms, and the abandonment of their homeworld. To lose him to this invisible enemy felt like a cruel joke from an uncaring universe. "Our numbers fall to 142, Dravan said quietly. The eternal flame had carried 220 souls when the sickness first appeared. Nearly 80 dragons had already perished, and every single survivor showed symptoms. The healers predicted total extinction within 6 moon cycles. Kira moved to stand beside her grandfather at the window. Head healer Mora tried a new treatment compound today. She combined elements from 3 different medical traditions, things that should never be mixed according to ancient protocols. Did it work? No. If anything, the patients grew worse. Kira's reflection in the window showed her pain. Mora says we have exhausted every option in our medical archives. 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge, and none of it can save us. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the ship's systems. Dravan had lived for 6 centuries. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had witnessed his species achieve wonders of technology and art. To think it would all end here, in the emptiness between stars, felt wrong in ways he could not express. "There might be one option we have not considered," Dravan said slowly. Kira looked at him with surprise. "What option?" "Mora has tried everything. Everything that dragons know," Dravan corrected. "But we are not the only intelligent species in this galaxy." Understanding dawned in Kira's eyes, followed quickly by shock. "No, grandfather, you cannot be suggesting what I think you are suggesting. The humans have different knowledge, different ways of thinking. Perhaps they could see something we cannot. Humans." Kira's voice rose with disbelief. "They're primitives. Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. Their medicine is crude and basic. What could they possibly offer us that our own healers cannot provide?" Dravan turned to face his granddaughter fully. "Hayat, Kira, that is what you are offering. And pride means nothing to the dead." "The Council of Elders would never agree," Kira protested. "Our laws forbid outsiders from boarding colony ships. It has been that way since the first ships left our homeworld 5,000 years ago. The technology aboard this vessel is sacred. Our privacy is absolute." "The Council of Elders is dying along with everyone else," Dravan replied, his voice harder now. "I have already contacted the survivors. They have granted me authority to act as I see fit for the survival of our people." "You have already decided this. I have decided that I will not watch my species disappear without trying every possible solution, no matter how unlikely it seems." For the next 3 rotations, Kira used the ship's long-range scanners to search nearby systems for human settlements. Most of human space remained far from their current position, but the scanners eventually detected a small outpost in the neighboring system. According to their database, it served as a repair station for human cargo vessels. Only one life sign registered at the facility. His name is Gene, Kira reported to her grandfather, age 28 by human counting. He operates the station alone, repairing ships that pass through this sector. According to trade records, he has a reputation for solving mechanical problems that other technicians consider impossible. A mechanic, not a healer, Draven noted. A mechanic is all we can find in this region, Kira replied. The nearest human medical facility is 17 systems away. None of us would survive the journey. Draven nodded slowly. The mechanic will have to do. Prepare a shuttle. We leave immediately. I am coming with you, Kira said firmly. You are sick. The journey will tax your strength. Everyone on the ship is sick, grandfather. You are sick too, though you hide it well. I am coming with you because someone needs to, and I am still strong enough to pilot a shuttle. Draven studied his granddaughter. Despite her illness, despite her youth, she carried herself with the strength of her ancestors. He felt pride swell in his chest, bitter and sweet at the same time. Very well, he agreed. Prepare the shuttle. The shuttle ride took 4 hours through empty space. Kira piloted while Draven rested in the passenger compartment, conserving his strength. Through the viewport, the human station grew from a distant speck to a collection of interconnected modules clinging to a small asteroid. Solar panels stretched out like metallic wings, and docking ports jutted from the structure at odd angles. It looked makeshift and temporary compared to Dragon architecture, yet something about it suggested careful planning. Kira sent the standard docking request through the communication array. The response came within moments, a male voice speaking accented but clear common tongue. Station Haven, reading you. State your purpose. We require assistance, Draven replied, leaning forward despite his exhaustion. Our colony suffers from an illness we cannot cure. We seek help from anyone willing to offer it. A long pause followed. Then the voice said, Dockaport 3. I will meet you there. The station interior smelled strange to Dragon's senses, a mixture of recycled air, machine lubricants, and something distinctly human. Kira wrinkled her snout as they walked through the main corridor, their claws clicking against metal grating. The walls were covered with tools, spare parts, and diagnostic equipment. Everything appeared functional but disorganized, as if the owner prioritized utility over aesthetics. A human waited at the corridor's end. He was smaller than Kira expected, standing barely taller than her shoulder, even though she was young by Dragon standards. His black hair fell past his ears, held back by a strip of cloth. Grease stained his gray work suit, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who worked with tools daily. His eyes, dark and alert, studied the two dragons with obvious curiosity rather than fear. I am Gene, the human said, inclining his head respectfully. You mentioned an illness. Draven explained everything. He described the symptoms, the progression, the deaths. He detailed every treatment the healers had attempted and how each had failed. He spoke of desperation and the extinction facing his species. Throughout the explanation, Gene listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When Draven finished, Gene remained quiet for several heartbeats. Finally, he said, I am not a doctor. My training is in mechanical systems and engineering. I repair ships and equipment. We understand, Kira interjected, her voice sharp with frustration. But we have nowhere else to turn. Our own healers, the finest medical minds of our species, cannot solve this. We need someone who thinks differently. Gene looked at Kira, then back to Draven. If I agree to help, I will need complete access to your ship. Every system, every room, every piece of technology. And you will need to trust my methods, even when they seem strange or wrong to you. The words hit Draven like a physical blow. What Gene requested violated every law and tradition of Dragon society. Colony ships were sacred spaces. No outsider had ever been granted such access. The elders would rage. Many dragons aboard would consider it betrayal. That is an enormous request, Draven said carefully. I know, Gene replied, but I cannot work blindly. If your healers have tried everything they know and failed, then the answer lies somewhere they have not looked. To find it, I need to see everything. Kira looked at her grandfather with alarm. Grandfather, you cannot be considering this. The technology aboard the Eternal Flame has been guarded for millennia. To give a human unrestricted access would be unthinkable. More unthinkable than extinction. Dravan asked quietly. The other dragons will never accept this, Kira insisted. They will revolt. Some might try to harm him. Then we will protect him, Dravan said. He turned back to Jean. I accept your terms. You will have complete access to our ship and our technology. In return, you will do everything in your power to save my people. Jean nodded once. Then we should leave immediately. Time matters in situations like this. The flight back to the Eternal Flame passed in tense silence. Kira could not believe her grandfather had agreed to such terms. Centuries of tradition, abandoned with a few words. She glanced at Jean, who sat in the shuttle's cargo area, studying a small handheld device. He seemed calm, almost unconcerned about the magnitude of what he had requested. The Eternal Flame loomed before them, its massive form blotting out the stars. The colony ship stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull crafted from metals that seemed to shift color in starlight. Crystalline structures rose from the surface like frozen flames, beautiful and otherworldly. It represented the pinnacle of dragon engineering, accumulated knowledge from thousands of years of space travel. Incredible, Jean whispered as they approached. The energy signature is unlike anything I have seen. Those crystal formations are not decorative, are they? They're part of the power distribution system. You can tell that just by looking? Kira asked, surprised despite herself. The way they are positioned suggests function over form, Jean replied. And my scanner detects energy flowing through them in complex patterns. When they docked, Dravan led Jean directly to the medical bay. Dozens of dragons lay on resting platforms throughout the large chamber. Some slept fitfully. Others stared at the ceiling with glazed eyes. Medical equipment hummed and beeped, monitoring vital signs that grew weaker by the day. The air smelled of sickness and herbal remedies. Head healer Mora looked up as they entered. She was an ancient dragon with deep purple scales and eyes that had witnessed 3 centuries of life. When she saw Jean, her expression hardened. So this is the human, Mora said, her voice dripping with disdain. The primitive who thinks he can cure what we cannot. I never said I could cure anything, Jean replied calmly. I said I would try to help. We do not need help from lesser species, Mora snapped. We have studied medicine since before your ancestors discovered fire. What could you possibly know that we do not? Jean did not respond to the insult. Instead, he began walking slowly around the medical bay, his eyes moving constantly. He observed the patients, the equipment, the layout of the room. He took out his device and pointed it at various objects, reading results on its small screen. What are you doing? Mora demanded. The patients are here. Why are you examining the walls? I am looking at everything, Jean said simply. That makes no sense. You are wasting time we do not have. Jean stopped and turned to face the angry healer. Tell me, how long have you been treating these patients using traditional dragon medicine? Since the illness first appeared 8 moon cycles ago. And has anything worked? Mora is gotaitant. No. Then perhaps traditional approaches are not the answer, Jean said gently. Perhaps we need to look at this problem differently. Over the next rotation, Jean did not spend time treating patients. Instead, he explored the ship with Kira as his reluctant guide. He examined the power systems, studied the environmental controls, and crawled through maintenance tunnels. He took readings with his scanner in dozens of locations, recording data in a small notebook he carried. The other dragons watched with growing frustration and anger. Word spread quickly that a human walked freely through their sacred ship, poking into systems that had been hidden from outsiders for millennia. Some demanded Dravan revoke the agreement. Others wanted Jean thrown off the vessel immediately. He does nothing, one elder shouted during an emergency council meeting. Dragons die every day while he plays with machinery like a hatchling with toys. Give him time, Dravan urged, though doubt gnawed at his own heart. He said his methods would seem strange. Strange is one thing, Mora interjected coldly. Useless is another. He has not examined a single patient since his arrival. He shows no interest in medical data or treatment protocols. I believe we have been deceived. Kira said nothing during the meeting, but privately, she shared their concerns. She had spent most of the rotation following Gene through the ship, watching him take readings and make notes. Nothing he did seemed related to healing. He focused entirely on engineering systems, paying particular attention to the massive crystal core that powered the eternal flame. "Why do you keep measuring radiation levels?" Kira finally asked as they stood in the power core chamber. The enormous crystal pulsed with blue-white light, energy flowing through it in visible streams. It was the heart of the ship, the sacred source that had powered their journey for 3 generations. Gene studied his scanner screen. Because radiation can cause symptoms very similar to what your people experience: fatigue, weakness, cellular degradation, eventual organ failure. "Our shielding is perfect," Kira protested. "This core has operated safely for 75 years. 75 years is a long time," Gene murmured. He moved closer to the crystal, examining its surface. "When was the last complete maintenance inspection?" "Before we left our homeworld, 3 generations ago. But we monitor all systems constantly. Any malfunction would be detected immediately." "Would it?" Gene pointed at a section of the crystal near its base. "Look there. Do you see that discoloration?" Kira moved closer. A thin line of darker material ran through the crystal, barely visible against the brilliant glow. "That is a minor inclusion. All natural crystals have such imperfections. It does not affect function." "Are you certain?" Gene asked. He held up his scanner. "Because this device detects radiation leaking from that exact spot. Not much, just a tiny amount. But over 75 years, even tiny amounts can accumulate." Kira felt her blood run cold. "That is impossible. If the shielding were compromised, our own scanners would alert us. Your scanners are designed to detect immediate dangers, catastrophic failures," Gene explained. "This is not catastrophic. It is subtle, a slow leak that has been poisoning your people for decades without anyone noticing." "You are saying the ship itself is making us sick?" "I am saying it is a possibility worth investigating." Gene turned to face her fully. "Tell me, where on the ship did the first cases appear?" Kira thought back to the early days of the illness. "Near the engineering sections, close to this chamber. And the illness spread outward from here." "Yes, but that could be coincidence." "Could be," Gene agreed. "Or it could be the answer everyone has been searching for. Not a virus, not a bacteria. Radiation poisoning from a failing containment system." The emergency council meeting lasted through the night cycle. Every remaining elder gathered in the great chamber, along with Mora and the senior engineers. Gene stood before them with Dravan at his side, presenting his findings. "You are suggesting our own ship is killing us?" one elder demanded incredulously. "The eternal flame has been our salvation. It carried us away from our dying world. How dare you accuse it of betrayal?" "I accuse nothing," Gene replied calmly. "I am presenting data. Radiation levels throughout the ship exceed safe limits by small but significant margins. The levels are highest near the power core and decrease with distance. This pattern matches exactly with how the illness spread through your population." Mora stepped forward, her expression skeptical. "Our medical scans show cellular damage consistent with a pathogen, not radiation exposure. Chronic radiation exposure causes cellular damage that can look very similar to disease," Gene explained, "especially when the exposure happens slowly over many years. Your bodies have been absorbing low-level radiation for decades. The symptoms only became severe recently because the damage finally reached a critical threshold." "This is absurd," another elder declared. "Our shielding technology is flawless. Dragons have used crystal power cores for 5,000 years without incident. Usually with regular maintenance and replacement," Gene countered. He displayed images on a portable projector, showing the microscopic cracks in the crystal containment. "Your core has operated continuously for 75 years without a complete shutdown. Small fractures have developed in the crystal matrix. They are invisible to standard scans, but measurable with specialized equipment. Kira studied the images with growing horror. She was an engineer. She understood what she was seeing. Those tiny fractures, barely wider than a molecule, were enough to allow radiation to seep through. Over decades, that seepage would have contaminated the entire ship. If you are correct, Dravan said slowly, then what is the solution? Jean took a deep breath. You need to replace the power core. The current crystal is compromised beyond repair. But replacing a core requires specialized facilities and equipment you do not have access to in deep space. So we are doomed regardless, Morris said bitterly. Not necessarily. Jean pulled up another display. There is an alternative. We can shut down the core completely and purge the ship's systems of accumulated radiation. It would take approximately 6 rotations. During that time, the ship would operate on emergency power only. Life support would function, but little else. 6 rotations in the dark and cold? An elder asked nervously. Many of our people are already weak. They might not survive such conditions. They definitely will not survive if the radiation continues poisoning them, Jean said bluntly. This is not a perfect solution, but it is the only one available with current resources. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some elders argued for trusting Jin's assessment. Others insisted it was all speculation, that they should continue searching for a medical cure. Mora remained skeptical, questioning whether a human could truly understand dragon biology well enough to make such claims. Finally, Dravan raised his hand for silence. We have a choice before us. We can continue on our current path, hoping for a miracle while our numbers dwindle to nothing. Or we can try something unprecedented based on the analysis of someone from outside our culture. I know which option I choose. You would bet our entire species on the word of a primitive? One elder challenged. I would bet our species on evidence and logic, Dravan replied. Jean has provided both. Our healers have provided neither, through no fault of their own. Sometimes the solution to a problem requires a fresh perspective. The vote was close, but eventually the majority agreed to attempt Jin's plan. Preparations began immediately. The engineering teams worked with Jean to develop a procedure for safe shutdown and purging. Mora and the medical staff prepared the sick for the ordeal ahead, administering strengthening compounds and moving the weakest patients to the most protected areas of the ship. Kira found herself working closely with Jean during the preparations. Her initial skepticism had transformed into cautious respect. Whatever else he might be, the human was brilliant with systems and engineering. He understood the eternal flame's power core better than some dragons who had studied it their entire lives. How did you know? Kira asked as they calibrated purging equipment. How did you see what our healers missed? Jean was quiet for a moment. I did not know, not first, but I learned something working alone at my station. When you face a problem you cannot solve, sometimes you need to stop looking at the problem itself and start examining everything around it. Your healers looked at sick dragons. I looked at the environment making them sick. That is not how dragons approach medicine. I know. That is why it worked. Jean smiled slightly. Sometimes being primitive has advantages. We solve problems differently because we must. Our technology is less advanced, so we rely more on observation and deduction. The day of the shutdown arrived. Every dragon aboard gathered in the central chambers, bringing blankets and supplies. The children huddled close to their parents. The elders settled into meditation postures, conserving strength. Mora and her healers moved among the sick, offering comfort and monitoring vital signs. Jean stood at the power core control station with Kira beside him. Dravan watched from nearby, his ancient face grave with concern. Once I start this process, there is no stopping it, Jean warned. The core will take 6 full rotations to purge and stabilize. If anyone changes their mind midway through, there's nothing I can do. We understand, Dravan said firmly. Proceed. Jin's hands moved over the controls. The crystalline heart of the eternal flame began to dim. Energy flow slowed and redirected into storage cells. Throughout the ship, lights flickered and faded to emergency levels. Temperature dropped as heating systems switched to minimal operation. The constant hum of full power died to a whisper. In the gathering dimness, dragons pulled blankets tighter and moved closer together for warmth. Children whimpered softly. Even the elders looked uncertain. Their ship, which had been their home and protector for 3 generations, suddenly felt dark and vulnerable. The first rotation passed slowly. Jean monitored readouts constantly, making small adjustments to the purging process. Kira assisted him, learning the procedures as they went. Mora made her rounds, checking on patients who struggled with the cold and reduced life support. By the third rotation, some of the sickest dragons began showing improvement. Their breathing came easier. Their eyes regained a hint of clarity. Mora could hardly believe what she witnessed. The inflammation is decreasing, she reported to Dravan. Cellular regeneration has begun in several patients. It should not be possible this quickly. Unless Jean was correct, Dravan replied. Unless we were not fighting a disease at all, but rather removing ourselves from a toxic environment. By the fifth rotation, the change was undeniable. Dragons who had been barely conscious for weeks were sitting up and speaking. The gray tint was fading from their scales. Strength was returning to wasted muscles. Even the children seemed livelier, playing quiet games in the dim corridors. Jean barely slept during the entire process, constantly monitoring and adjusting. Kira stayed with him, bringing food and insisting he rest when possible. She had never seen anyone work with such focused determination. "Why are you doing this?" Kira asked during one rest period. "We are nothing to you, strangers from another species. You could have refused to help, and no one would have blamed you." Jean looked at her with tired eyes. "When I was young, my family's ship suffered a catastrophic failure. We sent distress calls for 3 days while life support slowly failed. Another vessel finally heard us and came to help. The captain told my father that space is too vast and too dangerous for any species to face alone. We survive by helping each other." He smiled faintly. "Besides, this is the most interesting problem I have ever worked on." On the sixth rotation, Jean initiated the final sequence. New shielding compounds, synthesized from ship stores using Jin specifications, were applied to the crystal core. Additional containment fields were activated. Slowly, carefully, power began flowing again through the restored systems. The lights came up gradually. Heat returned to the corridors. Full life support resumed operation. Throughout the eternal flame, dragons stirred and looked around with wonder. They were awakening not just from darkness, but from the shadow of death itself. Dravan stood in the medical bay, watching his people with tears streaming down his scaled face. Nearly every patient was conscious and improving. The gray tint had vanished from their scales. Life had returned to their eyes. Mora approached him, her expression complex. "I was wrong about the human," she admitted quietly. "I let pride and tradition blind me to possibilities. He saved us when I could not." "He saved us because you could not," Dravan corrected gently. "That is not failure, Mora. That is why different species and different perspectives matter. No one can know everything." Jean emerged from the power core chamber with Kira, both exhausted but relieved. Dravan met them in the corridor, and for a long moment, the ancient dragon simply looked at the young human who had accomplished the impossible. Then Dravan did something unprecedented. He lowered his head in a gesture of deep respect, a bow that dragon leaders reserved only for equals. "You have saved my people," Dravan said. "We can never repay this debt." "No debt," Jean replied. "Just neighbors helping neighbors in a big galaxy." In the days that followed, the eternal flame continued its journey with renewed hope. The dragons recovered their strength. Engineers worked with Jin's designs to implement better monitoring systems throughout the ship. Mora and her healers studied Jin's approach, learning to look beyond traditional methods when problems defied conventional solutions. Kira volunteered to pilot Jin back to his station, but he surprised everyone by asking to stay aboard for another week. "I would like to ensure the repairs hold," he explained. "And honestly, I want to learn more about your technology. Not to steal or exploit, but because it is fascinating." The elders agreed readily. Gene became the first outsider ever granted extended access to a Dragon colony ship. He spent his days working alongside Dragon engineers, sharing knowledge freely. Humans thought differently about engineering problems. Dragons had wisdom from millennia of experience. Together, they found solutions neither could have reached alone. When the time finally came for Gene to return home, half the ship gathered to see him off. Children who had recovered brought him gifts crafted from crystal. Engineers gave him schematics for technologies they thought might benefit his station. Even Mora approached with grudging respect. "You taught me something important," the old healer told him. "Pride is a poor shield against ignorance." "I will remember that." Kira piloted the shuttle once more. As they flew away from the eternal flame, Gene looked back at the massive ship glowing against the stars. "They will be all right," Kira said. "I know," Gene replied. "They are survivors. They just needed a little help remembering how to survive this particular challenge." "Will you stay in contact? Our communication systems can reach your station from several systems away." Gene smiled. "I would like that. Maybe this is the beginning of something important. Not just dragons and humans, but different species learning to work together, to trust each other." "You sound optimistic." "I fix broken things for a living," Gene said. "You have to be optimistic in that line of work. Otherwise, you would never start." They reached Station Haven 4 hours later. As Gene prepared to disembark, Kira stopped him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing what we could not see, for caring enough to try, for showing us that sometimes the best help comes from unexpected places." Gene nodded. "Take care of your people. And if you ever need help again, you know where to find me." The shuttle departed, leaving Gene standing alone in his cluttered station. But he did not feel alone. Somewhere out there, an entire dragon colony sailed through the stars because one human mechanic had looked at their problem differently. And in the years that came, that chance encounter would be remembered by both species as the moment when the vast loneliness of space became a little less lonely. When two civilizations learned that survival sometimes depends on setting aside pride and accepting help from the most unexpected sources. The eternal flame continued its journey, carrying not just dragons, but a new understanding. In the infinite darkness between stars, life persisted not through strength alone, but through connection, cooperation, and the courage to trust those different from themselves. The end.